Thinking about the capacity for optimal success, wondering what the role of education is in defining our national identity for success. Pause, think about it with intentional thought, and consider where we go from here. Stay tuned and hear what Pastor Dr. Cleveland W. Eneas III, boy, these fellows with big names, Anku Sa Ra, as many of us know him, got to say about our national attitude towards success.
Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles. What we think, we become. What we radiate, we attract. What we imagine, we surely can achieve. Let's change the narrative, 242.
Welcome to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. Join our co-sponsors, Dom Dev Enterprises and Page Investment, and our friends at Something to Think About. In this discussion today, the Honorable Ka-Hun, how you pronounce it? Anku Sa Ra. Welcome, sir, to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having us, the Holy Qubtic Church, here. It's great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Now, you have a pretty lengthy bio, so I can grab a couple of snapshots of it.
That's fine. That's perfectly fine.
What I think is important for here is that you're a graduate of Tuskegee University in biology, and now this modern Cum Laude class. I graduated, thank you, Lord. So if the conversation gets a little unbalanced, that's because yeah, you know how to go. But he's also ordained, which I definitely am not, as a pastor of the Holy Qubtic Church, Qubtic Church of the Black Messiah. And you studied at the Holy Seed University, and you got a degree in global religious and interfaith studies in the field of critical theology. Boy, that sounds like the monks go up in the mountain and sit down and have this detailed meditation and thought and critical thinking and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And from there you were able to become, I guess, what you call an equivalent to a cardinal, which is the Ka-Hun?
Correct. Ka-Hun, you said it perfectly.
Okay, great. And that's the fraternity of true Christians. Boy, you know, when these words are true. Mm-hmm. And everybody can say, well, what you trying to say about my religion? And so forth. But he's a public speaker. He's a guest lecturer at the University of Bahamas, a former dean. You could pronounce the university's name.
Ka-Hun International Academy. Ka-Hun International Academy.
Okay. And an author. Percussionist. That's somebody with music, and I have two left hands for beating drums. So, and then he's a family man, loving husband, father, and all of the goodies that come along with that. Where's the book? And I guess he had no excuse to be an author because this book here is penned down by Dr. Cleveland W. Eneas, and that would be the original Kimbo Key.
That's the original. That's senior right there.
Right.
Yes.
Good. All right. But I got to get some of your books too then, because and I got to catch up with my reading. Yes. But welcome.
Great to be here.
Yeah. Now, y'all use this word a lot. Namaste.
Namastu, yes.
Namastu. Okay. And tell me it means I love this word. So it tells me it means that I bow to the divinity in me or you.
That's correct.
I send it to you.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, not people, not of you, or by somebody else on their behalf. The divinity in them.
That's correct.
And I think that's deep. Deep. Very important. Very important. One's purpose.
Yes.
And it also suggests to me that as an individual, we have to know who we are and where we are and why we are. And so that's why we want to have this discussion today to help us understand education can be a major player causing us to create the identity that we need to be successful as a nation.
Yes.
Great. So let's start by defining who do we know to be a Bahamian, or what is a Bahamian based on identity?
So, when we came, those of us who did come over here on ships, on slave ships, there were no Haitians, there were no Jamaicans, there were no Bajans, there were no Caribbean people on those ships. We were all African, whether we call ourselves Yoruba or Shanti or Fendi or Zulu or whichever tribal name we identified with at the time. Those were the names that we brought here to the Bahamas. In fact, as I sit here in Fox Hill, today, Fox Hill is known as Congo Town also. And so you have people from various African lineages that ultimately populated this country, whereby you have places like Gambia that phonetically links to the Gambia. You have the Yoruba that populated Baintown and Fox Hill as well. And so this idea of Bahamian identity is really an experiment whereby even many people in the generation just before me, I was born in 1977, but anybody born before 1973 was still a British subject.
Right.
So it's fairly, this identity of us being Bahamian is still fairly new in relation to, let's say, America that's been doing it for hundreds of years, or even Britain. And so, we have this conversation often because we're still building the narrative of what a Bahamian is. And it's not, I don't think it's something that we can put into one phrase or something that we can define this year and never go back to it. We're going to have to keep going at it. So for me, a Bahamian is one who obviously has their roots in Africa or in Europe or whichever country they ultimately came from before we became an independent nation. And we as people from different countries are coming together to make this Bahamas work as best as possible. You know what I mean? But it's definitely an experiment.
Right. Well, that's great to understand that, because that means that we should be dynamic in our thoughts and not necessarily just be static because certain things happen at certain time.
Right.
And like right now, I think we are about 80% Afro, 10% white, 1% pretty much the rest. Well, there's a little more than 8%, but I think about 90%.
Yeah, like 90%. Yeah.
Right, and then it's about 1% for other, etc.
Right.
But yet our educational system is predominantly pro-colonial or even white in system.
That's correct. That's correct.
Electoral register is suggesting that we have a population split where there's about 70% would be independence babies, which would be 73 onwards like yourself. And then the rest would be 30% would be converted subjects, as we just talked about, like myself.
Right.
Even though I identify more. Our dominant ideologies are split 50-50 from a colonial instruments point of view, like in the monarchy and all that kind of stuff, versus a representative democracy. Right, and then we also have adding to the picture where we passionately seek to erase all of the monarchy stuff tooth to the nail, but then we dismiss the Bahamian language, which a lot of people misguidedly dialect, for the King's English.
Right.
So, I mean, what are we saying? We are mixed up by consolidated.
Well, you started by mentioning the fact that our education system is pretty much a remnant of the colonial past. I mean, it never went anywhere. It's been with us, forever in our Bahamian history. And the reason why something like Bahamian dialect is we exclude it is because it's not a part of our formal education. Bahamian dialect is not seen as something, or is really not something that allows you to, for example, just get a good grade in English. If you bring Bahamian dialect into your English class, you're going to be downgraded. You won't be upgraded for that. And so, if you get a bad grade, it means that you won't do well in school. If you don't do well in school, you won't get a good job. If you don't have a good job, you can have a bad life. And so Bahamian dialect then is associated with having a bad life or not having an educated life. And that's unfortunate, but we have to decide again if we are truly Bahamians, and if this Bahamian identity is something that we truly want to hold on to. We cannot just only speak dialect in the street. We need to hear the dialect in the House of Parliament. We need to hear the dialect in the churches. We need to hear the dialect in the schools. If indeed we're going to be looking towards the dialect as a part of our true identity.
Yes, very much so. And Arlene Ferguson says that on the show she was on before, that actually the dialect is a derivative from the language of the Geechee language and the other still. And then they made it a dialect by trying to correlated with the English language more so than anything else. But it's still a language. And I believe that it needs to be put in the schools and teach it, and we need to honor it and praise it in as our national language. And then when we need to deal with international bodies, and you slip into the side where a common language that everybody could understand. Right? That's my personal view on it. Right?
Yeah. But that's why I don't say proper English. I say standard English. Because there's a standard that the world kind of agrees on, and we should know standard English. However, the Bahamian dialect is something that if we're serious about actually having this identity that we love to brag about, then let's see how we can formalize the Bahamian dialect and make it something that's ons, as we would say. That's ons.
Right. Yeah. So when we look at these things now, the three things of education, identity, and then potential to be successful, meet our purpose, stuff. Let's start with education. What is education? And your definition.
Education is looked at in different ways depending on which perspective you're coming from, right? So, as a word, this word education, it comes from a word that means to draw out, educare.
Right.
So ultimately, there's something within us already that a true educational system is supposed to help bring out. We already have the talents or the gifts that have been bestowed upon us by our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, all the way back to the Most High. Those things are already in us. It's no different than planting an orange seed or a canap seed or a sapodilla seed. You don't have to teach a sapodilla how to be a sapodilla. You don't have to teach a ganap how to be a ganap, etc., etc. You just have to make sure as a farmer that you have the proper environment for that seed to flourish. And if you do that, that seed is going to ultimately become whatever type of tree it is you planted into the ground. And if you have the proper nourishment, it will produce more of what it is. We
Right.
are the same way. The difference in how we are treated as colonial subjects is that the education system left behind by the British was not designed for us to be more of who we are.
Right.
It ultimately worked as a tool and still works as a tool to create little British men, little British men and little British women.
Right.
And that is what you see paraded around the upper echelons of our society today, where anytime we put our best foot forward, we are becoming little Englishmen. And so this doesn't serve us because the colonial system didn't serve us and doesn't serve us. It serves the quote unquote mother country, right?
Right.
The United Kingdom. And so when they left the British education system behind, they made sure that the systems that they had left in place, which work for them more than they do for us, we would be in a position to run those systems, even though those systems don't necessarily benefit us in any meaningful way. The only way those systems will truly benefit you is if you are more of an Englishman than you are an actual Bahamian, or definitely more than you are an African.
Right.
And so education then ultimately, in that sense, is a colonial tool or weapon. But in its truest sense, it allows for us to bring the divinity that is within us from the inside on to the outside, which is why we say Namastu, because we know that there's a divinity in each of us. And if we have proper or true education, that divinity will come shining through.
Right. And so on that same note, then for identity, everybody has an identity. What would the critical components of somebody's identity?
Identity ultimately gives you access. It gives you access. For example, if you want to access your bank account, they ask for your identity. If you want to access a gated community, etc., they ask for your identity. Your identity says ultimately who you are, what you are, why you are here, etc., etc. And the identity that we have is supposed to ultimately give us access. Unfortunately, when you're taught that your identity is backwards, or if your identity is considered savage,
right,
or if your identity is considered uncivilized, etc., etc., what happens is that identity becomes an actual block to access. You don't actually gain access, but you actually are hindered from accessing anything of any real value in a society that doesn't respect or appreciate your true identity as an African. And so identity, when we look at the way we speak, and when we look at the way we dress, and when we look at the way we eat, etc., etc., all of those things are necessary for us to reach our fullest or our highest potential. As a matter of fact, in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48, we are told to be perfect like the Most High Heavenly One in heaven. We're told to be perfect. But how can you be perfect when you don't understand what it means, or we don't understand what it means to be created in the image and after the likeness of the Most High? If we don't understand that basic principle, the very first thing that God gave us was identity.
Right.
And when male and female created he them, and called them and gave them this image and this likeness. You understand? Matthew 1, Genesis 1, 26 and 27. So if the first thing that we were given was an image and a likeness, which establishes our identity, the Most High obviously knew that it was necessary for this image and this likeness to be utilized in reaching our fullest potential. And so identity is definitely something that as a Bahamian, we have to begin to kind of re-quantify or reanalyze how well our identity works for us in our own country.
Yeah. I would say it's slightly different before we get to the comment on the screen, but if I have an identity based on, like you mentioned earlier, and the school system is designed for people of a different identity. To me, it's similar to me trying to put an 8-track cassette in a Blu-ray system. Right. There's going to be the disconnect, and then there's going to be the frustrations because no music is coming out or whatever video. And then all of the ills of society tackles from there.
Right.
Precisely.
I love that analogy.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Sorry.
What's
it? Shunk? How you pronounce that?
Shishunk Amonre. Yes, Shishunk.
Okay. He says, I agree. Education system needs to meet our needs as a race. And welcome to the show. Yes. Yeah. So
I agree.
That's going to be one of the things that we're going to have to address as we go on the show.
Yes.
Now, looking at that, then there has to be a connection between education and identity in order to drive the success that we all come under the when we had the penny era and those where we say we wipe everybody's tear and create everybody could have a house and a picket yard and what have you.
Right.
We paint these pictures as to what is success.
Right.
But how do the three of those components connect in order for us to achieve whatever our success is supposed to be?
Well, when you look at the actual word etymologically, this word identity, it means sameness or oneness or a state of being the same. So same as what would be the question. What has happened is our education system aims to make us the same as our colonial masters. And like you just said so eloquently, the 8-track can never work with the Blu-ray system. It just won't work. The 8-track would be considered dumb. The 8-track would be considered useless. That's what happens when an African is trying to be British. All right. When we understand that education is supposed to ultimately bring out our truest potential or our highest or most divine qualities. And those higher or divine qualities are not the same as the actual oppressors that left us the education system. What happens is you have a society or a system that is going to look at anybody who's not trying to be the same as the colonial master as a troubled person, as either dumb or a person who refuses to comply with, I just look at, for example, the way that we fight our young men with their hair, right? Or even our young sisters with their hair. There was a time when women could not wear natural hair in banks. I know it's different. It's changed now, right?
Yeah, but not to cut you off, but before I forget this, though, on that same point.
Yeah.
When I went to my barber today, down West Side barber shop, Ka-Hun, there was this young man in the seat before I reached, right? High school student, getting his hair cut. His hair is almost as low as mine and probably about the size of yours. But the school sent him home the day before and told him he had to get his hair cut before he comes back to school because it's too high.
Right.
And that just didn't like, the two of us were sitting there trying to figure out where is the hair on this young man's head that is too high.
Right.
So are we creating these barriers to success in our own society?
That's exactly what we're doing, because we're majoring. Some people would say that's majoring in the minor, right? It's not that young men shouldn't have their hair groomed, or young women shouldn't have their hair groomed. However, there's the intent behind why we're asking these young men to completely cut off their hair, right? I remember when I was in school, and the white boys, their hair would fall down when it grew longer.
Right.
And they were allowed to wear their hair a little longer than, or a lot longer than ours, because their hair fell down.
Right.
Because ours grew up and out. As soon as it begins to grow up and out, we're flagged for that. No, you got to cut that down. But yet, my classmate, he could put his hand through his hair, and he could, he could shake his hair around, without penalty.
Right.
But that just really speaks to the intent of the education system, and the fact that this image of what success really supposed to look like, right? His hair looked like a person who used to rule us.
Right.
This identity, this sameness, this oneness of the identity and those who actually put the system together. It says, okay, well, that's okay. You can have your hair like that. And that's just talking about hair. They had a whole campaign a couple of years ago, support the puff, young student down at C.R. Walker. But the reality of the situation is, we these kind of conversations are very necessary. I know in the Ministry of Education right now, a lot is being done to retweak the history curriculum, and to make sure we don't just start teaching history from slavery time, right? And make sure that we have an understanding of our greatness, and the fact that slavery interrupted this greatness, and it's not in and of itself our history. And so I think as we begin to move in this direction, we'll find that people begin to have more pride in who they are or who they is, right? And make sure that we don't have to be quote unquote putting our best foot forward, and that best foot not look like us.
Right. So it begs to say that then that as a nation we really need to define what our identity needs to be for us to be successful moving forward, because we talked about the 80%, the 90%, and then the 91% kind of thing thereafter, of which most don't look like or have the same pockets as us and all that kind of stuff. So when we look at all of the differences from the minority point of view, a lot of them are the ones who controlling the economy and so forth. How do they look at us? Who have curly hair, or I mean, my hair ain't curly no more because it's kind of low.
Well, that's just it. They say that's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rule. So, number one, as Bahamians, as Black Bahamians, as Bahamians of African descent, we have to stop playing this game of I'm Bahamian, but I'm not African. Okay, I love being Bahamian. I'm very proud to be a Bahamian, but I understand that the Bahamian in me is the fruit. The African in me is the root.
Oh boy!
You can't have a fruit without a root. You understand? And so I can be Bahamian, and I can love who I am as a Bahamian, but still respect my heritage as an African, which is what my grandfather was doing in the book Baying Down. He was showing that we have a heritage and a culture that goes beyond the Bahamas, and then we can be proud of it, and that we don't have to put down our Africanness to be Bahamian. You understand? Because Bahamian is ultimately a response to a global oppression, just like Jamaican, just like Bajan, all of these different names or nationhoods. We're trying to euphemize a terror, an awful terror that took place and that still takes place. We're trying to put a band-aid on it by simply saying, oh, now we're a nation, we're Bahamian, or we're Jamaican, or we're Haitian, and not identify with the terror some would say the Ma'afa, some would say the Nerit, some would say slavery. We have to ultimately go back to who and what we were if we're going to properly heal, which would then allow us to be even better Bahamians.
Right.
You understand? So it's not about putting Bahamas or the Bahamas down as much as it is allowing our true essence to shine through our Bahamianness.
Yeah. And so if the minority who has the money and who might have the higher education as a mass percentage-wise compared to the majority as a percentage, majority, then that will say that if they are refraining from putting their assets on the table because of the polarization that is happening in our country, and people tend to don't want to speak to it, but it's there. I mean, yes, we're friendly with everybody and so forth, but when it comes down to business or some of the critical items of society, there's still a huge polarity between those who are Afro background and those who are of the 10% background and so forth. So how do we get over that so we could achieve our greatness?
That's a great question. We first have to recognize that this is a staple of our colonial legacy. It's not just here in the Bahamas. It is throughout the Caribbean. It's throughout the diaspora, where you have a minority group that is controlling the majority of the resources in these countries. We have to organize ourselves. It's not that we don't have the power. It's not that we don't have the intelligence. We lack organization, but that organization requires us to have an identity. If we're not identifying with each other in terms of having the same difficulties or hurdles or challenges, if we're not identifying with each other in that way, then we won't come together in an organized way to actually do something about it. If I feel because I have a great job and I have food in my fridge and I have, you know, all of the creature comforts at home, I'm not going to identify with a person who's saying to me, hey, you see what's going on in this country, right? You see the fact that we are the majority, but we own the least amount of the resources. I don't want to interfere with the little bit of crumbs that I catching. So I say to you, well, listen, I don't want to rock the boat. You know, I think we need to move past that. If I could do it, you could do it. You need to pull up your bootstraps. All of these different things we say to each other to ignore the reality. So we as a people, those of us who think this way, have to organize, and this is what we do in the Holy Qubtic Church, whereby we simply say, those who need it, the way that we are teaching it, we invite you to come and be a part of our fellowship, because what that allows us to do is it allows us to pool our resources. It allows us to find a way to not continue to look at the problem and not do something about it, but actually come together and using the resources that we have, begin to make a difference in our lives, whereby we become examples to others. And so one of the things that we have to do is we have to become the examples and become the change. I know it sounds cliche, become the change that you want to see, but that's really a formula for making the change.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so does our educational system, whether it's the university or down to kindergarten, have a role to play in changing that attitude?
It does, because again, Sheikh Anta Diop, one of the greatest, they would say Egyptologists, but he's an anthropologist who really, really fought hard to get us to see that the greatness in Africa was established by Black Africans. And one of the things he says in one of his books on the origins of African civilizations, he says that until we formalize African culture into the education system, it will never be taken seriously. And I understand what he was saying then, because even now, as a teacher, if I decided one day to just teach about the greatness of Africa, as much as the students may love it, and as much as maybe even the parents may love it, the ultimate question is going to be asked by those people who are responsible: is this in the curriculum?
Right.
Because your job is to prepare them for a national exam ultimately.
Right.
And so until the national exams reflect the identity of the people, then the national exams and the education system will act as a buffer to us actually taking our culture and taking our identity seriously. We have to make sure that everything that we need to be our fullest potential is at the end of the day in the BGCSE, on the BJC, in the GLAT, all of the final national exams and standardized tests that all of these children are taking after school classes for. Those things that we're talking about now need to be in those standardized examinations. Otherwise, you'll never take it seriously. It'll just always be something that we talk about on the side.
Right. And that's some powerful stuff there. I always say that we have to be able to leverage the majority at its maximum optimal performance state in order to get the best for the country. And so we have to find a way to change that attitude.
Yes.
Cool. Well, folks, you're watching something to think about with Day and Happy Knowles, and we're here with Anku Sa Ra, and we're talking about the role of education and changing our identity for maximum potential to achieve our success. We'll be right back.
Sammy's Chicken. There's nothing like it.
When you're looking for clothing, you can shop from store to store. But when you need gowns and tuxedos for weddings, proms, or any black tie event, there's only one name to remember: Buttons Bridal and Formal Wear, since 1986. Enjoy gowns and tuxedos for any budget. We'll see you at Buttons Showroom in Cable Beach, Nassau, or visit buttonsformalwear.com. Nobody does formal wear like Buttons.
Scoop, lick, and savor is a smile and memory being made or reminisce. Whether you're at work, out with family on a Sunday, or have friends visiting, flavor will meet expectations in our 32-ounce container for only $10 if you're having a special event as well. Exotic flavors ranging from soursop to Guinness is definitely worthwhile.
Welcome back to Something to Think About with Day and Happy Knowles. We're here with the Honorable Anku Sa Ra. And we're talking about the national attitude towards success and how the role of education can help us along that way. Welcome back, Anku.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me. I love the show.
Awesome. Glad that you like it because knowledgeable people like y'all. When you see things that look good, then I like when y'all see it. Right? And productive. Trying to help the society move from strength to strength.
Yes.
So the holy Qubtic church is an extreme minority. Say it again.
Qubtic. Yes.
Yeah, see, my English teachers got me saying it wrong. See? Now you're saying it right the first time. Yeah. Anyway, I'll get it right before sure. Too much considering British system in my head. And that's what happens when you go on a subject and then you convert it to a So the church is a minority. Sorry?
I said that's what the conversation is about today. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I said the church is a minority in our religious system in the Bahamas. But you seem to be very stable and entrenched in the thoughts and I don't just mean you, I mean all the brothers that I meet from the church also. And to know your identity and your purpose and why you're here for. Our constitution in the Bahamas is supposed to be our legal beacon for our identity, to say what we are. And there's a clause in there that says that the establishment of a free and democratic society, sovereign nation, founded on spiritual values. Now, they have the wisdom to say spiritual values and not necessarily Christian or whatever else. So tell us now. Fundamentally, what is the difference between you and the traditional Christian church in the Bahamas?
Sure. So first of all, for those who may have a Bible near them, if you go to Luke chapter 12, verse 32, it says, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Anytime this true religious identity, we don't merely call it a religion, but it is a true religious identity. It's a religion that I can identify with, whereby the truth, which we understand as the law, or which we understand as this way of life of the Messiah, can be lived, whereby we can reach our fullest potential. When we look at the churches in the Bahamas today, we have a Church of Rome, the Holy Catholic Church. We have a church of Greece, the Greek Orthodox Church. We have the Church of England, the Anglican Church, and we can go on and on. So these churches that many of the worshipers in Christianity today, our brothers and sisters in Christ, the houses of worship that they flock to are associated with or linked to a culture or a nation. Rome, England, Greece. The difference with our church, the Holy Qubtic Church, and these other churches is that our national identity goes back to Africa. And that only makes sense to us based on the fact that we are African. Now, we're not telling anybody where they should go to church. However, it is important for us to not only have a religion, but to also have an identity whereby we can ultimately reach our fullest potential. This truth that we are seeking is not merely saying that I'm right and you're wrong. That's not what the Holy Qubtic Church is all about. We understand that in order for us to embrace this divinity within, that we must live like the real and living Messiah, Yahshua Christ, who many call Jesus Christ today. That Messiah, however, is an African Messiah, as mentioned in the book of Revelation 3 and 14, whereby he is called the Amen. This Amen, in historical terms, is known as Tut Ankh Amun, or Tut Ankh Amen. And he, 3,500 years ago, is the example that the Most High Heavenly One gave to the three groups of 12 royal tribes, whereby we could once again atone, or we can find those things meant for atone or the Most High. Right. And so the difference has a lot to do with which nation each of these churches are attached to. And we're not from any particular country in Africa. We say the entire continent.
Right. So when we speak of that, then persons from your society comes with a confidence and a level of assurity that they understand what they are talking about. How come y'all are able to do that and a lot of other denominations don't? Because I think that when you're able to do that, then you're able to also advance the cause.
Well, I can't speak for other denominations, but what I can say for us is that when anybody takes the time to simply learn about who they are, it does bring a sense of confidence, because the standard that you're upholding is ultimately your standard. Okay. You know, if you're trying to be British amongst the British, of course you're going to shrink. If you're trying to be Roman amongst the Romans, yeah, you're going to shrink, because you're not going to outdo the Romans. You're not going to out-Greek the Greeks. You're not going to out-European the Europeans.
Right.
We as the Holy Qubtic Church recognize that, number one, we're not a monolith. We're not. Everybody's not the same throughout the continent or the diaspora, and so we understand that it's good enough for you to just be you, understanding that the divinity is within you, and that divinity, if you're living in accordance with the laws that the Messiah lived by, they will allow for the divine aspects of who you are to shine through. Right. And the more you gain confidence in that, the better it is you become at actually interacting with people. We say in our etiquettes, we talk about first knowing yourself. You have to know yourself. Once you have begun to know yourself, then you can begin to manage yourself. Once you've begun to manage yourself, then the conversation that you have, and we all have a conversation going on inside our head, that conversation changes. The doubts begin to move out of the way, and those affirmations, they begin to echo in that conversation. And then once that happens, then you can begin to interact with people in a more confident way, whereby the light that is in you begins to shine and people begin to see it, and you become the example, just like the Messiah, Yahshua Christ, was the example for his people 35 to 2,000 years ago, 3,500 to 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. That's a long time.
Yeah.
So that confidence, if I could equate that to like when I play baseball, the fellow who had the most confidence when he comes to the bat, the pitcher is throwing 100+ miles an hour, he hit the ball and he had the most success. And he was able to keep raising his game to another level. So if we could find a way to build the confidence in our brothers and sisters here in the society, right? Whatever group you are, in the whole Bahamas should be like rising tide raises all ships, right?
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a challenge that we need to find a way to do.
Yeah, and it Brother Knowles, it happens when our leaders in education and otherwise understand the importance of placing our identity in the curriculum, whereby it enhances the value of who we are.
Okay.
Imagine getting an A for learning about who you are.
Right.
I mean, like, that wouldn't even feel like school. It would just feel like, you're in a position to actually learn about yourself and understand who you are, and people value you for that. That gives you confidence. Instead, what happens is, if we want to learn about ourselves, we're told, well, that's really not on the curriculum, but you need to learn about, Christopher Columbus, or you need to learn about Woods Rogers. And it causes us to shrink. It causes us to want to push our identity in other ways. And this is why you have this marginalized identity in society today, where people are saying, if I'm not valued in school, then let me be valued someplace else. And so they find a value in the streets.
Right. Yeah. And going back to the divide between the 90% Afro and the 10% rest. If the systems that we have of education is matched to their background, more so than anybody else's background, then we see how they succeed and excel in everything that they do. Whereas we don't excel in everything we do because, like you said, there's that mismatch between the two systems. The system that we've been taught and us as individuals, and what's that skill set, right? I always say people of the diaspora have be more kinetically inclined and a different type of thinking, because we were on the boats and the this and the that and fishing, defending somebody who would have been scholars or like. And so we have to find that happy medium to match everything together.
Yeah.
Right. So what can the government on private sector do to create the environment, the education environment, for us to be able to achieve these things?
Well, it's already started. The Honorable Glennis Martin and her team, Dr. Chris Curry and others are working feverishly to update or amend or change, if you will, the history curriculum to reflect our greatness, whereby everything that I'm talking about today in terms of us being able to value who we are, that process, it will begin. I'm not saying they're going to do every single thing in this administration, but they've at least started to put things in motion. And I think when we start to see it, not only in education, but also when the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas sees fit to, air a Dr. John Henrik Clark or Dr. Ben Yakunin or Dr. A.J. Varma or any of our scholars who have spent their life's work trying to show us who and what we are in terms of our true identity. And we can see these things playing on television on a more regular basis or even at all. Then again, we begin to value it, because oftentimes we don't appreciate how quickly a thing can be valued just because it's on television. And so these tools that have kept us in the dark for so long can now be utilized to bring us to light. And so it's just a matter of, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to make the wheel work on our car. So we can use our education system, but we can insert us as the substantive and valuable aspect of that system, whereby we can then begin to see ourselves and our identity as being valuable. And then we'll see that begin to flower in our lives in different ways.
Yeah, well, that's good that you say that, because you mentioned the word that when we see ourselves, but when we drive around, we see everybody else. The statue of Columbus, the statue of this, who you got to look around the corner to see what opinion is, or you can't even find where the successor list, and so forth. Then we have the national awards, honors awards. And you hear all the talk about it that week, and then the people disappear. There's nowhere for the public to see when they don't, unless you go to, I guess, Pompeii, and stuff like that, places like those.
Right.
But in terms of being a part of the routine visibility in your face, they always tell you, if you want to achieve something, put it on your fridge. And you see it all the time on your fridge. So I think that's the same thing that we should be doing with all of our heroes and the persons you spoke of just now who have the academic
yes, I agree 100%. They say out of sight, out of mind. And so when we see a statue of Queen Victoria and Christopher Columbus and Woodes Rogers, etc., constantly, that's a form of psychological warfare, whereby we are constantly given these images of people who did not have our best interests at hand, people who, at the end of the day, never even saw us as human beings, people who have left us in a state whereby we basically function off of self-hate more than anything else.
Right.
I was very pleased to see that statue removed from the steps of Government House. I think if for example, if Samilo Butler being the first Bahamian Governor General, why not put him up there?
Yeah.
And put a full body statue of him as opposed to just a bust.
Yeah. Right.
You understand? It doesn't mean that they have to if they don't want to throw them away, just create a colonial park and put them all in there. But the point of the matter is that you said it best when you said we drive around, we can make a larger than life conch shell and put it in the middle of a roundabout. But when it comes to making a statue of the father of the nation, Linden Pinland, he's exactly the same height as he was in real life. You know,
around the corner.
And round the corner, right? And so these things are strategically done to interfere with us psychologically, and we have to be aware of how that affects us and affects the generations to come. Whereby we don't speak about it and do something about it, then it will continue to happen. And so I pray that this conversation helps to move us in the direction where we will see our national heroes minted in these statues that we can see around the country.
Yeah. I think people also dismiss a little bit about the power of their voice because we had recommended to a number of times. He was on the show. I think on one of the shows and another time we recommended the same thing to put Samilo up there and put Christopher Columbus in the harbor.
Right.
Where the tourists coming in could see him, marvel at all the niceties that they repaint in the international arena. So we could capitalize on, get some of that fun, the things that he caused for us, and so forth. But to me, these icons, these visible things, are part of our educational system. And so, when I speak of education, I'm just talking about in the classroom.
Right.
And so, education, I was taught, was to do with academics, experiences, and exposure. But we seem to be limited in our exposure, and our experiences is even less. So how do we fix those before we move forward?
Well, the saying goes, wherever the mind goes, the body will follow. And so there has to be a unification of the minds. Okay, we first have to have value in this conversation. We have to recognize that, like you said, our education is not only in the classroom. Our education is our experiences every day, all day, and it determines our reality. When we begin to unite mentally on these type of discussions, whereby we may not all agree on every I dotted and on every T crossed, but if we have a general appreciation for our Africanness and this sense of identity, a sense of identity is a sense of being, to be or ultimately become that which allows for you to be or reach your best highest potential, right?
Right.
When that is the discussion, then these things that we see on the coat of arms or statues around the country, etc., people are gonna have to look twice at those things, because we're gonna have to ask ourselves, how does this ultimately facilitate us becoming who we know we are? If we're not willing, in Holy Qubtic Church we say, don't be, learn to become.
Right.
There's a divinity within you that wants to shine, that wants to come out. As simple as putting that seed in the ground. Once it has the right conditions, you don't have to teach a tree how to grow. It grows.
Right.
And we're no different. So all of these things, statues and symbols alike, represent the environment or represent the conditions. And if we understand that those conditions are not favorable at this time and that we need to change the conditions, the quicker we change them, the quicker we grow or become into who we ultimately can become.
Right. Well, Uncle, time really is flying now. I mean, I don't know where I'm going, but run up on us real quick. We really appreciate you taking the time and the day we adjusted the time so we could match, because we really wanted to bring you to the table and have this discussion and open some more eyes and some more avenues for greater discussions across the board. And at a later date, maybe we could find a time to bring you back and continue the conversation with some activities and so forth. But is there anything you would like to say to the public before we head out? Yeah. Still there? Or you froze? Something happened. No, he's still there. Can you hear me? I guess maybe this thing dropped. All right. Well, folks, you're watching something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles. And we're here this evening with Anku Sa Ra, Dr. Cleveland W. Eneas III. And he dropped a lot of nuggets on the table as what we need to do, who we are, why we need to do it, and so forth. And so we hope the show has been of value to you and you're able to find ways that you could use from it. And so we encourage you to share it. We encourage you to like it. We encourage you to speak about it with everybody so that we could try and move forward. Because if we could get the majority of persons from functioning at their near potential, this country will grow from leaps and bounds, and we will be able to achieve that $100 billion economy that I always talk about. So, Madam Producer, thank you kindly, everybody on social media. We'll be back next week with another provocative conversation and hopefully expands our country. Namaste.
Enjoyed the show? Then subscribe to us for more educational and inspirational content. Ring the bell so you never miss a show. Let's change the narrative 242.